She knocked on his hotel door at midnight. He thought it was an invitation. She called the police. 20 years of untold love ended in a broken arm. And a confession that shocked everyone. My name is Carol Ann Whitfield, and I have been an obstetrician at Livingston General Hospital for 16 years. In that time, I have delivered over 2,000 babies. I have held the hands of mothers in labor and fathers in panic. I have walked families through the best moments of their lives and, too often, through the worst. I have seen more blood and pain and joy than any person should have to witness in a single lifetime, and I have learned to take it all in stride, to compartmentalize, to process, to move on. But some things you cannot compartmentalize. Some things stay with you like scars that never quite heal. This is a story about one of those things. Part 1. The town we came from. Justine Monroe and Damon Cole grew up in Prosper Falls, Montana, a town so small that most Montanans had never heard of it until the State Tourism Board discovered its potential for heritage tourism and started running commercials featuring the majestic mountain backdrop and the crystal clear river that ran through the center of town. Before the tourists came, Prosper Falls was just another dying rural community, a place where young people left for college and never came back, where the main street had more boarded-up windows than open businesses, where the highlight of any given weekend was a high school football game that drew a crowd of maybe 200 people, most of whom were related to the players. But the town had its charms. There was the old covered bridge that spanned the river at the north end of town, the one that featured in approximately every prompt photo taken in Prosper Falls between 1975 and 2005. There was May's Diner, where May Patterson had been making the same meatloaf special every Thursday for 43 years. And there was the view from the ridge on the east side of town, where you could see the whole valley spread out below you like a painting, the river glinting in the afternoon sun, the mountains rising up in the distance, the little town clustered at their feet like something from a postcard. Justine and Damon used to climb that ridge together when they were kids. They had been in the same class since first grade, along with about 30 other kids who made up the entire student body of Prosper Falls Elementary. In a town that small, everyone knew everyone, and childhood friendships had a tendency to calcify into something permanent, bonds forged not by choice but by proximity, by the simple fact that there was no one else to bond with. But Justine's friendship with Damien had always been different. She was the smartest kid in class, the one who read ahead in textbook and corrected the teacher's grammar and wrote essays that got published in the regional spelling bee program. She had long dark hair that she wore in a braid down her back, and she wore glasses that made her look older than her years, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that made other kids uneasy, as if she knew something they didn't. Damon was something else entirely. He was the kid who threw rocks at the school windows and got suspended for a week. He was the kid who rode his dirt bike through the cemetery and dared other kids to sneak into the old Miller place at the edge of town, the one with the reputation for being haunted. He was loud and reckless and had a smile that suggested he found everything amusing, especially the consequences of his own actions. His family had money. His father owned the only hardware store in town and half the rental property on Main Street, and Damon had a way of wielding that privilege like a weapon. He collected followers the way some kids collected baseball cards, and by the time they were in 8th grade, he had assembled a loose gang of boys who did his bidding without question. But Damon never picked on the kids who deserved it least, the poor kids, the weird kids, the kids who ate lunch alone. He saved his cruelty for the kids who kiffed up to teacher, who tattled on their friend, who stood out in ways that made them targets. Everyone thought he was a bully. Justine thought he was something more complicated. "You're not as stupid as you pretend to be," she told him once, in 9th grade, after he turned in an FA that was actually quite good. Damon had looked at her with those pale blue eyes of his and grinned. "And you're not as perfect as you pretend to be." "We're both liars, Justine. The only difference is I admit it." She should have been offended. Instead, she felt seen in a way that frightened her. The story about Damien and Justine that circulated through Prosper Falls for years went like this. Justine had liked Damien since they were kids. She had denied it, of course, had dismissed him publicly as a troublemaker and a waste of potential, but the truth was that she had been drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. There was something magnetic about his chaos, something alive in the midst of all that small-town stagnation. Damon, for his part, had fallen hard for Justine sometime around sophomore years. He had started showing up at her locker with flowers he picked from Mrs. Thompson's garden. He had started sitting next to her in class even when there were empty seats elsewhere. He had started finding excuses to walk past her house on his way home from school. But Justine had a boyfriend by then, a boy named Kevin from the next town over who played offensive tackle on the rival high school's football team and had hands the size of dinner plates. She had been dating Kevin since the previous summer, and she had no intention of breaking up with him for Damon Cole, no matter how persistent he was. The story reached its climax during their junior year, when Damon supposedly confronted Justine in the parking lot after a school dance and declared his love for her in front of half the junior class. "Justine, I've loved you since the 7th grade, he had apparently said, according to accounts that grew more elaborate with each retelling. "I've loved you when you ignored me, when you mocked me, when you told me I'd never amount to anything. I love you now, and I'll love you when we're old and gray and this town is nothing but a memory." Justine had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had gotten into Kevin's truck and driven away. But here was the thing about the story that no one quite agreed on. What happened next? According to one version, the one that circulated most widely, Damon had been so devastated by Justine's rejection that he went home and cried for 3 days, then emerged from his house a changed man. He threw himself into his schoolwork. He stopped running with his friends. He became, practically overnight, the kind of student he should have been all along. According to another version, whispered in smaller circle, mostly by people who had known Damon since childhood, the story was different. In this version, it was Justine who had approached Damon, not the other way around. She had come to him after the dance, in the empty parking lot, and she had told him that she was breaking up with Kevin, that she wanted to be with him, that she was ready to admit what she had been denying for years. And Damon, to everyone's shock, including Justine's, had said no. "Go back to Kevin," he had told her, according to this version. "You're not ready for this. And neither am I." They never spoke about it publicly. But the story persisted, passed from one graduating class to the next like a ghost story, a cautionary tale about the one that got away. After high school, Justine's path took her to Helena, where she attended a small business college and earned a degree in accounting. Damon stayed in Prosper Falls, graduated from the community college in Billings, and came back to town to work in his father's hardware store. For a while, it seemed like their story had reached its natural conclusion. Justine's life was in Helena, Damon's was in Prosper Falls, and the 100 miles between them might as well have been 1,000. But then Kevin happened. Kevin, who had gone to Montana State on a football scholarship and gotten a job in Bozeman after graduation. Kevin, who had stayed in Justine's life in a way that Damon never could, as a friend, a confidant, a steady presence through all the uncertainty of her 20s. Kevin, who eventually became Justine's husband. Damon was not invited to the wedding. But he heard about it within hours, because in Prosper Falls, news traveled faster than the speed of light. He heard that Justine was radiant in her dress, that Kevin had cried during his mouth, that the reception was held at May's Diner because Justine had always loved the meatloaf special. And he heard that she hadn't looked happy. Not the way a bride was supposed to look. She had looked like someone going through the motions, someone playing a role she had rehearsed but never quite believed in. Damon didn't know what to do with that information. To a woman named Brooke who taught second grade at Prosper Falls Elementary and had a laugh that could sell a room. He was, by all appearances, content. He had a wife, a house, a business, and a community that knew him and accepted him. He had the life that everyone in Prosper Falls aspired to. But sometimes, late at night, when Brooke was asleep and the house was quiet, Damon would lie awake and think about the parking lot behind the school. He would think about Justine's face in the moonlight, the hurt in her eyes when he had told her to go back to Kevin. He would wonder, for the 1000th time, if he had made the right choice. Part 2, The Reunion. I first met Damon Cole in the fall of 2019 at the annual Prosper Falls Founders Day celebration. By that point, I had let him Prosper Falls for 11 years, ever since my husband Marcus and I had moved there from Seattle so that Marcus could take over his father's medical practice. I had grown to love the town in spite of myself, the way you grow to love something that is inconvenient and frustrating and utterly impossible to leave. I had delivered babies here, saved lives here, lost patients here. I had buried my father-in-law and delivered the child of a woman I had gone to high school with in Seattle, without either of us recognizing the other until I was elbow-deep in the miracle of new life. Damon Cole walked up to me at the Founders Day barbecue with 2 plates of pulled pork and a smile that reminded me, uncomfortably, of every charming I had ever known. "You must be the OB," he said. "Everyone talks about you." "I'm the OB," I confirmed. "And you must be the hardware store guy." "Guilty." He handed me a plate. "My wife says you're the best doctor in 3 counties. I told her that's not saying much, since the next closest hospital is 40 minutes away. She told me to be nice. I laughed. "Your wife sounds smart." "She is. Too smart for me, most days." He scanned the crowd, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of something, there and gone. "You know, my wife and I went to school with a lot of people in this town. Small world, Prosper Falls. Is that how you ended up here? You never left? Never had a reason to?" He took a bite of his pulled pork. "Well, Dad and my family's been here forever. Cole Hardware, 3rd generation. My grandfather started it in 1962. I nodded, making appropriate noises. But something in his story didn't add up, and it bothered me in the way that unresolved puzzles always bothered me. It wasn't until later, after Damon had wandered off to refill his drink and I had spotted him standing near the old covered bridge, staring at a woman across the crowd with an expression I couldn't quite read, that I put the pieces together. The woman was beautiful in a way that belied her 40-odd years, dark hair streaked with silver, sharp features, a mouth that seemed perpetually poised between a smile and something more guarded. She was standing next to a man who was clearly her husband, a tall, broad-shouldered type with a farmer's tan and the comfortable, unself-conscious posture of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. I didn't know it yet, but that woman was Justine Monroe. And the man she was standing with was Kevin. The phone call came at 2 a.m. on a fun day in August, 3 years after the Founders Day celebration. "Carl? It's Marcus." My husband's voice was tight, controlled, the voice he used when something was very wrong. "Wake up. We need to go." "What's happening?" "Justine Monroe. She just called. Something's happened at the hotel, her friend Damon. She needs us to come." I was fully awake by then, sitting up in bed, my heart already racing. "What do you mean, something's happened?" I don't know the details. She was hysterical. She just said there was an incident and she needs us to come to the Prosper Falls Lodge right now. I was already reaching for my clothes. On the drive over, Marcus filled me in on what he knew. Damon Cole and Justine Monroe had reconnected a week earlier during a small reunion of old Prosper Falls residents at the home of a mutual friend. Justine was in town visiting. She and Kevin came back every summer for Founders Day and to see the sites that had been turned into tourist attractions since the town's transformation. They had no family left in Prosper Falls. Justine's parents had passed away years ago, and Kevin's parents had moved to Arizona to escape the Montana winters. But this year, something had been different. Something had shifted. Marcus didn't know what. He only knew that Justine had called Kevin at 1 a.m. to tell him she was at the police station, that Damon had been arrested, and that everything was falling apart. We pulled into the parking lot of the Prosper Falls Lodge just as the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the mountains. The parking lot was full of vehicles, police cars, an ambulance, a few civilian cars whose owners I didn't recognize. Inside the lobby, we found chaos. There were police officers everywhere, some in uniform, some in plain clothes, all of them moving with a kind of purposeful urgency that suggested something serious had occurred. There was a cluster of people near the front desk. The hotel manager, a woman in a bathrobe who looked like she hadn't slept in days, and two men I didn't recognize. And there, sitting in a plastic chair against the wall, was Justine Monroe. She looked like a ghost. Her hair was uncombed, her face was pale, and she was wrapped in a blanket that someone had given her, her hands trembling around the edges. When she saw me, she stood up so fast the blanket fell from her shoulders. "Carl," she said. "Oh God, Carl, thank you for coming." I crossed the lobby and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Justine, what happened? What can you tell me?" She shook her head, and I could see the tears forming in her eyes. "It's Damon," she whispered. We. I went to his room to borrow a hairdryer because mine wasn't working, and She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My stomach dropped. I had seen enough in my years of practice to recognize the signs, even in the absence of explicit language. The trembling, the pallor, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had just experienced something that would change them forever. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said gently. "From the beginning." Justine took a shaky breath. I went to his room. The door was open. He asked me to come in. I went in. He was nice at first. We talked for a while. And then he grabbed me. And he wouldn't let go. And I told him no, I told him to stop, but he didn't stop. Her voice broke. I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried. According to the police report, which I read in full 2 days later, after Marcus pulled some strings with his contacts at the sheriff's department, the timeline was as follows. Justine had gone to Damon's room at approximately 11:45 p.m. She was carrying a hairdryer, which she later confirmed was not actually broken. She had used it as an excuse. Damon had invited her in. They had talked for approximately 15 minutes, during which time Damon's wife Brooke, who had gone to bed early with a headache, was asleep in the next room. At approximately midnight, Damon had made a move. According to Justine's statement, he had put his arms around her and told her he had wanted this for 20 years. According to Damon's statement, which he gave only once, in a voice so quiet the officer had to ask him to repeat it several times, Justine had come on to him. She had entered his room willingly. She had sat on his bed. She had kissed him back when he kissed her. She didn't say no, Damon had said, according to the report. Not at first. Not until I was, And then she changed her mind. But by then it was too late. I couldn't stop. The phrase "too late" appeared twice in his statement. The officer noted that he seemed to be in a state of shock. When Justine had finally managed to push him off, she had run to the bathroom and locked the door. She had called Kevin, who was asleep in their room down the hall. By the time Kevin arrived at Damon's room, Damon had locked the door and refused to come out. Kevin had kicked the door in. What happened next was a blur of shouting and fists and bodies colliding in a small hotel room. Brock, woken by the noise, had come out of the bedroom to find her husband on the floor with Kevin on top of him, both men throwing punches. She had screamed. The hotel staff had called the police. In the chaos, Damon's arm had been twisted at an unnatural angle. When the police finally managed to separate the two men, Damon was on the floor, clutching his right arm, his face gray with pain. The ambulance took him to the emergency room. The X-rays confirmed what everyone suspected: a clean fracture of the right radii, the larger of the two bones in the forearm. Marcus spent the next several hours on the phone, pulling strings, calling in favors, trying to make sure that the situation was handled as discreetly as possible. In a town like Prosper Falls, where everyone knew everyone and gossip was the local currency, a scandal like this could destroy lives. Not just Damon's and Justine, but their family, their reputations, their futures. "This is a mess," Marcus said, pacing the hotel lobby while I sat with Justine. "It's a complete mess. What are we going to do?" I asked. "What we can. Make sure the investigation is handled properly. Make sure neither of them does anything stupid." He ran a hand through his hair. "Kevin's at the station being questioned. Brooke is at the hospital with Damon. She's devastated, obviously. And Justine." He looked at me, and I could see the weight of the situation in his eyes. "Justine needs to decide what she wants to do. Whether she wants to press charges. Whether she wants to let this die quietly. And if she chooses to press charges..." Marcus shook his head. "Then we have a criminal case on our hands. Two married people, a reunion, a hotel room, a broken arm. It's a mess, Carl. A complete mess." Part 3: The Hospital. The next morning, I went to the hospital to check on Damon. I told myself I was going because I was a doctor and he was a patient, and that was what doctors did. But the truth was more complicated than that. I went because I needed to understand what had happened. I needed to look Damon Cole in the eye and see if I could find the monster that the night's event seemed to suggest he was. The hospital room was quiet when I arrived. Damon was lying in bed with his right arm in a cast from wrist to elbow, elevated on pillows. Brooke was sitting in the chair beside him, her face a mask of exhaustion and something that might have been anger or might have been grief. "Dr. Whitfield," Brooke said when she saw me. Her voice was flat, polite, utterly devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming." "I wanted to check on him," I said. "See how he's doing." "He's doing about as well as you'd expect." She stood. "I'm going to get some coffee. I'll be back in 10 minutes. She walked out without looking at Damon. The door clicked shut behind her. Damon stared at the ceiling. His face was the color of old paper, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "How's your arm?" I asked finally. "It hurts." His voice was barely a whisper. "They gave me something for the pain, but I can still feel it. The bone, you know? I can feel where it broke." I nodded. I had seen enough fractures to know what he meant. The phantom sensation of a broken bone, the way it announced itself even through the medication. "Damon," I said carefully, "can you tell me what happened last night?" He closed his eyes. "I've already told the police." "I know, but I'm asking you, as a friend." His eyes opened. They were red-rimmed, and for the first time since I had met him, Damon Cole looked like exactly what he was, a man who had done something terrible and was now living with the consequences. "She came to my room," he said. "Justine. She said she needed a hairdryer. Her room's was broken," she said. He paused. "But her hair was dry. When she came in, I could tell. Her hair was dry." "20 years. 20 years of watching her from a distance, of thinking about what might have been, of wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life when I told her to go back to Kevin." His voice cracked. I stayed silent. I invited her to sit down. We talked. And then I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her I had always loved her. I told her I had never stopped. And then I kissed her. "And she kissed you back?" He hesitated. "At first. Yes. At first she did." "What happened then?" "She changed her mind. She pushed me away. She told me she couldn't do this, that it wasn't right, that she was married and so was I." He swallowed hard. "But by then I was too far gone. I couldn't stop. And when she ran to the bathroom and locked the door, I knew it was over. I knew I had ruined everything." Brooke came back with her coffee. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her husband with an expression I couldn't interpret. "I'm going to need to know, Damon," she said quietly. "I'm going to need to know if what they say is true." Damon looked at her. The silence between them was devastating. "Yes," he said finally. "It's true." Brock nodded once, a small, controlled movement. Then she set her coffee on the counter and walked out of the room. I heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. I found Justine in the hospital chapel, which was really just a small room with a wooden cross on the wall and a few rows of pews that no one ever used. She was sitting in the front row, her head bowed, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look up when I came in. "I talked to Damon," I said, sitting down beside her. "He confirmed what happened." Justine was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "He said I kissed him back. Is that true?" She nodded. "At first. At the very beginning. Before I came to my senses." "Why did you go to his room, Justine?" "Really?" She let out a breath that sounded like it had been building inside her for years. "Because I wanted to. Because I spent 20 years wondering what would have happened if things had been different, and I thought maybe this was my chance to find out. To get the answer to a question I had never been brave enough to ask." "And what was the answer?" She looked at me then, and her eyes were full of something I couldn't name, grief, maybe, or shame, or the particular kind of sorrow that comes from realizing you are not the person you thought you were. "I don't know," she said. "I still don't know. I thought I wanted him. I thought I had always wanted him. But when it actually happened, when it was real and not just a fantasy, something in me just shut down. And I couldn't. I wasn't able to." She trailed off. I reached over and took her hand. You don't have to explain anything to me. I know. But I need to explain it to myself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I told Kevin that Damon forced himself on me. I told the police the same thing. And in a way, that's true. He did force himself on me. But in another way, in the way that matters most. I let it happen. I went to his room. I kissed him. I gave him every signal a person could give without saying the words outright. Why didn't you say the words? Justine laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Because I was a coward. Because saying the words would have made it real, and I wasn't sure I could handle real. Because part of me wanted to be a victim, not a participant, because victims get sympathy and participants get blamed. The honesty of it was stunning. I had spent my career listening to patients justify and rationalize and minimize. But I had never heard anyone take responsibility so completely, so nakedly, for something that was also, in another sense, not entirely their fault. What are you going to do? I asked. Justine was quiet for a long time. The morning light was coming through the small window behind the cross, casting long shadows across the floor. I'm going to tell the police the truth, she said finally. I'm going to tell them that it wasn't exactly the way I said it was. That I was a willing participant up to a point, and that Damon's crime wasn't the act itself. It was not stopping when I changed my mind. That's going to be incredibly painful. I know. It's going to blow up your life. Kevin, your marriage, your reputation, all of it. I know. She looked at me, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked calm. Resolved. But I can't live with a lie. I've been living with a lie for 20 years, Carl. The lie that I made the right choice when I chose Kevin over Damon. The lie that I was happy. The lie that I didn't still wonder, every single day, what might have been. She stood up. She smoothed her skirt with her hands. I think I'm done with boys, she said. I think it's time to find out who I really am. Part 4, The Confession. The meeting happened at the hospital. Justine had asked to see Damon, not in his room, but in one of the conference rooms on the ground floor. Marcus arranged it. The police agreed to it, provided that officers were stationed outside the door. I was there. So was Kevin, who had arrived that morning from the hotel where he'd been staying since the incident. And Brooke, who had come back to the hospital despite everything, because she said she needed to hear it for herself. The conference room was small and sterile, a long table, a few chairs, a whiteboard that no one ever wrote on. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. It smelled like disinfectant and cold coffee. Damon was brought in by an officer, his arm still in its cast, his face gray and drawn. He sat down at the table across from Justine, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. I watched them, these two people who had known each other since childhood, who had circled each other for 20 years, who had finally collided in the worst possible way. And I thought about how strange it was that love could take so many forms. Love that spoke its name openly, love that hid in silence, love that became something else entirely when the circumstances were wrong. Justine spoke first. I need to tell you something, she said. Her voice was steady. And I need you to listen. Damon nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. What happened in your room last night? I need you to know that I'm not blameless in it. I went to your room on purpose. I wasn't there for a hairdryer. I wanted to be with you, Damon. I had wanted it for years, and I finally convinced myself that acting on it was the right thing to do. Damon's eyes widened. Justine, you don't have to. Let me finish. She held up a hand. I wanted it. But when it actually happened, when it became real instead of just a fantasy I'd been carrying around in my head, something changed. I got scared. I realized that I wasn't just risking my marriage, I was risking everything. My family, my sense of self, the story I had told myself about who I was. She paused. Kevin reached over and took her hand. She let him. So I tried to stop. I pushed you away. And you didn't stop. The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't stop, Damon repeated. His voice was barely audible. I should have. I wanted to. But I didn't. Why? He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with tears. Because I was afraid that if I let you go, you would disappear again. That you would go back to Kevin and our lives would continue on the same trajectory they had been on for 20 years, close but not touching, familiar but not known. I was afraid that this was my only chance, and I couldn't bring myself to let it go. That's not a good enough reason. I know. That's not an excuse. I know that too. Justine nodded slowly. So what do we do now? Damon looked at her, really looked at her, with all the years and all the longing and all the regret packed into a single gaze. I don't know, he said. I have no idea. The silence that followed was broken by Brooke. She stood up from her chair, and she walked around the table to where Damon was sitting. She stood there for a moment, looking down at her husband, and I saw something shift in her face, a transition from one emotion to another, like watching a mask being removed. I need to say something, she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. I have spent the last 12 hours trying to understand how my husband could do something like this. How the man I married, the father of my children, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, could betray me so completely. Damon didn't look up. He stared at the table, his jaw tight, his broken arm cradled against his chest. And I keep coming back to the same conclusion, Brock continued, which is that this didn't start last night. This started 20 years ago, before either of us were even in the picture. This has been building for 20 years, and I was just collateral damage. Broke, Damon started. Let me finish. She took a breath. I am furious at you. I am humiliated. I am heartbroken. But I am also, I don't know the word. I need you to know that I see what happened here, even if I don't forgive it yet. I see that you have been carrying something for 20 years, and I never knew. I never saw it. And maybe that's my fault too, in some way I'm not ready to examine yet. She turned to Justine. And I need you to know that I don't blame you. Not entirely. What happened in that room was Damon's choice, not yours. But you were both playing with fire, and now we're all standing in the ashes. Justine looked up at Brock with tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I know you are. Brock's voice was surprisingly gentle. But sorry doesn't fix this. Nothing fixes this. We just have to figure out how to live with it. What happened in that conference room that morning was nothing short of a breakdown of everything we think we know about people and their choices. Justine told the police, in the presence of her husband and mine and Brooke and a very uncomfortable-looking detective, that she wanted to recant her original statement. Not entirely, she still maintained that Damon had continued when she had asked him to stop, but partially. She wanted the record to reflect that she had been a willing participant up to a point, that she had initiated contact, that she had sent signals she had no business sending. The detective listened. He took notes. He asked questions. And then he told her that what she was describing was still, legally speaking, a crime, that the moment she withdrew consent, the act became assault, regardless of what had come before. "I know," Justine said. "I know what it is. I just need the truth to be known." The detective nodded. He closed his notebook. "I'm going to recommend that Mr. Cole be charged with assault in the second degree," he said. "Given the circumstances, the lack of physical evidence, and the victim's own statements about her complicity in the events leading up to the assault, I don't anticipate this going to trial. My guess is a plea deal. But that's above my pay grade." He stood up. "Mr. Cole, you're free to go for now, pending further investigation. I'd recommend you get a lawyer." Damon stood up, his face ashen. "Can I say something before we go?" The detective shrugged. "Make it quick." Damon looked at Justine. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I loved you. I have always loved you. And I let that love turn into something ugly, something destructive, something that hurt both of us and people who didn't deserve to be hurt." Justine looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me. You loved the fantasy you built in your head over 20 years of wanting something you couldn't have. That isn't love, Damon. That's obsession. And the difference matters." She stood up. Kevin stood with her. "Come on," she said to him. "Let's go home." They walked out of the conference room. Brooke followed a moment later, pausing only to look back at her husband with an expression I couldn't read. And then it was just me and Marcus and Damon, standing in that sterile conference room with its humming lights and its cold coffee and its sense of life irrevocably altered. I walked over to Damon. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that felt true. "You're an idiot," I told him. "A complete and total idiot." He laughed, a small, broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Part 5, What Remains. The legal aftermath was exactly as the detective had predicted. Damon was charged with second-degree assault. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a sentence of probation and community service. He was required to attend counseling, both individual therapy and a program for anger management and impulse control that Marcus's colleague ran out of the hospital in Livingston. Brooke filed for divorce 3 months later. She moved to Missoula to be closer to her sister, taking the kids with her. The hardware store passed to Damon's younger sister, who had no interest in running it and sold it within a year to a chain hardware store out of Bozeman. Justine and Kevin stayed together. I don't know how, exactly. The trust between them must have been shattered in ways I can only imagine. But they went to marriage counseling for over a year, and eventually they moved back to Helena, where Kevin had a job in software sales and Justine worked for a nonprofit that did advocacy work for survivors of sexual assault. I saw Justine once more after that morning in the conference room, about 2 years later, at a conference on trauma-informed care in Boise, where she was speaking about her experience as a survivor and the importance of honest self-examination in the healing process. She looked different. Older, maybe, but also somehow lighter. As if the weight she had been carrying for 20 years had finally been lifted, replaced by something harder to name. "How are you?" I asked after her talk. "Better," she said. "Not perfect, but better." "Do you ever hear from Damon?" She shook her head. "No. And I don't want to. I think it's better for both of us if we just let it be." I nodded. "Can I ask you something? Honestly?" "Of course." Do you regret it? Going to his room that night? Justine thought about the question for a long time. Outside the conference room, I could hear the noise of the convention, people talking, laughing, the clink of coffee cups. But inside, there was only silence. I regret what I caused, she said finally. I regret the damage to my marriage, even though Kevin and I worked through it. I regret the pain I caused Brooke and Damon's kids. Those are real regrets, and I carry them every day. She paused. But do I regret going to that room? Do I regret finally getting an answer to the question I had been asking for 20 years? She smiled, but it was a complicated smile, full of things that didn't fit neatly into categories. I don't know. I really don't know. Some question, once answered, open up more questions. And some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. Is that a yes or a no? She laughed. It's I don't know. It's the most honest answer I can give. On the drive home from Boise, Marcus and I didn't talk much. We were both processing the conference, the conversation, the weight of all those stories we had heard over 2 days. About an hour outside of Boise, Marcus broke the silence. Do you think they were ever really in love? Damon and Justine? I thought about it. I think they were in love with the possibility of each other, with the idea of a life they might have had if things had been different. That's not the same as loving the actual person. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. We drove in silence for another few miles. I think love has to happen in the light, I said finally. I think that's the only way it can be real. What Damon and Justine had, what they thought they had, it was never in the light. It was always in the shadows, always imagined, always incomplete. And incomplete things break in incomplete ways. Marcus reached over and took my hand. That's very wise, Dr. Whitfield. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I mean it. He squeezed my hand. You have seen more of life than most people. You know how it breaks people, and you know how they put themselves back together. I trust your wisdom. I smiled. It felt good to smile. Let's get home, I said. I have patients in the morning. That was 13 years ago. Damon Cole is 71 years old now. He lives alone in a small house on the edge of Prosper Fall, not far from the hardware store that isn't his anymore. He goes to church on Sundays and volunteers at the food bank on Wednesdays. He has not seen Brooke since the divorce was finalized, though their children, now adults, maintain a cautious relationship with both of them. Justine Monroe is 68. She and Kevin are still married. They live in a suburb of Helena with 2 dogs and a cat that Kevin found wandering the neighborhood 5 years ago. Justine does advocacy work, writes a blog about trauma and recovery, and has become something of a local celebrity in the Montana progressive community for her work on behalf of assault survivors. She and I have stayed in touch. Not closely. We live in different towns and our lives don't overlap much, but we exchange Christmas cards and the occasional email. In her last card, she wrote, "I am happy." Not the way I thought I would be, but genuinely, deeply happy. It took me a long time to find this version of myself. I think she was always there, waiting for me to stop running from her asteroids. Marcus and I are still in Prosper Fall. Our children have grown and moved away. Our practice is now run by a younger doctor named Sarah who trained under Marcus and shares his gentle, methodical approach to medicine. We have a garden that we are too old to maintain properly, a dog who sleeps 16 hours a day, and a life that is quiet and comfortable and, on most days, deeply satisfying. Sometimes, when I am driving through town and I pass the old covered bridge or May's Diner or the ridge on the east side where Damon and Justine used to climb as children, I think about that night. The chaos of it, the pain, the way it exposed the tender, wounded places in all of us. I think about how easy it is to spend decades circling the same question, afraid to ask it directly, afraid of what the answer might be. And I think about how the answer, when it finally comes, is never quite what we expected, because the fantasy and the reality are never the same thing. The end. Part 6. The years after. The Prosper Falls of today is unrecognizable from the one I first moved to in 2008. The tourism board has turned the old covered bridge into a heritage experience with a $15 admission fee and a gift shop selling commemorative t-shirts and keychains made in China. May's Diner was bought out by a regional restaurant chain and transformed into an authentic Montana dining experience with prices that would make May spin in her grave. The view from the ridge has been preserved, at least a small parking lot and a few benches for tourists who want to take photos of the valley below. But the town still has its charms, if you know where to look. There are the older residents who remember the before times, who tell stories about floods and fires and the great drought of 1988 that nearly emptied the town entirely. There are the kids who still climb the ridge, even though they're not supposed to, leaving behind the trail of wrappers and bottles that generations of kids have left before them. There is the river, always the river, running through the center of everything like a vein. I think about Damon Cole sometimes, in the years since that night. I see him at the grocery store sometimes, or at the hardware store that isn't his anymore, shuffling along with a limp that never quite went away after his arm healed. He looks older now, gray and stooped and diminished in ways that have nothing to do with time. He lives alone in that small house on the edge of town, tending a garden he doesn't seem to care about, attending a church he doesn't seem to believe in. Brooke moved to Missoula and never came back. Their children, twin boys named Tyler and Connor, grew up mostly without him, spending summers with their mother and Christmases with their father in a series of awkward hotel visits that never quite felt like family. They're in college now, both of them, studying at the University of Montana. They don't talk about what happened. No one in Prosper Falls talks about what happened if they can help it. But I know. And Marcus knows. And the 4 people who were in that conference room that morning know the truth that we all agreed, implicitly, never to speak of again, that some stories don't have clean endings. That some people are both victims and perpetrators. That love, or what we call love, can be a force of such devastating power that it destroys everything it touches, including the people who carry it inside them. Part 7. Justine's blog. I discovered Justine's blog by accident, 3 years after the incident. I was searching for information on trauma recovery for a patient, a young woman who had been assaulted at a party and was struggling to find her way back to something that felt like normal life, when I came across a post that mentioned Prosper Falls. The blog was called The Unwritten Page, and it was written by someone named Jay Monroe. The post was about what the writer called the myth of the perfect victim. We talk about victims as if they are always innocent, Jay Monroe wrote. We talk about perpetrators as if they are always monsters. But the truth is much more complicated. Real life is full of gray areas, full of people who are both things at once, both hurt and hurting, both wronged and wrong. And when we refuse to see that complexity, we do a disservice to everyone involved. I read through the blog for hours. There were posts about the writer's childhood in a small Montana town, about a relationship that had spanned decades without ever quite becoming what either person wanted, about a night in a hotel room that had changed everything. There were posts about marriage and infidelity and 1,000 small betrayals that accumulate over a lifetime of loving someone imperfectly. And there were posts about healing. About the long, slow process of learning to live with what you have done and what has been done to you. About the way that truth, however painful, is the only foundation for anything real. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't tell her I had found her blog, that I knew who she was, that I had been in that conference room when she told the truth about what had happened. Some things are better left in the past. But I read her words, and I found comfort in them, comfort in knowing that she had found a way to make meaning from the chaos, to transform pain into something that could help other people. That is what we do, I suppose. We take the broken pieces of our lives and we build something new from them. We turn the stories we didn't choose into stories that might save someone else. Part 8, a conversation. Last summer, I ran into Kevin at the farmer's market in Livingston. He was buying tomatoes from a vendor I knew, joking with her about the weather, looking like a man who had found his way back to something like contentment. He didn't see me at first, and I had a moment to observe him, to notice the new lines around his eyes, the way his hair had started to gray at the temple, the easy confidence in his posture that I remembered from before. Then he looked up and saw me, and his face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, recognition, a flicker of something that might have been pain, before settling into a smile. "Carl," he said. "Long time no see." "Kevin." I shook his hand. "How have you been?" "Pretty good. Pretty good." He gestured at my basket. "Getting some good stuff today?" "Carrots, mostly. My husband is on a health kick." Kevin laughed. "Tell me about it." "Justine has me on some kind of plant-based thing. I swear I haven't had a burger in 3 months." We laughed together, and for a moment it was almost like the old days, before the hotel, before the police station, before everything that had broken between us and healed in ways that were never quite as strong as what came before. "How is Justine?" I asked carefully. "She's good. Really good, actually." Kevin's expression softened. "She's been writing a blog and stuff. She wants to turn it into a book eventually. I think it's been good for her, having a way to process everything." "That's wonderful." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "It was a rough few years there. After, we almost didn't make it, you know? There were times when I thought we were done." "What kept you together?" Kevin considered the question. "Honestly, I don't know. Stubbornness, maybe. We had been married for 20 years by that point. That's a lot of history to throw away because of one thing, even something as big as this." "It wasn't just one thing, Kevin." "No. I know." He sighed. "It was years of things. Years of not really seeing each other, years of taking each other for granted, years of all the small ways we failed each other. The hotel was just the thing that brought it all to a head." "And what happened after? How did you find your way back?" Kevin looked at me, and his eyes were old in a way I hadn't noticed before. "We talked. Really talked, for the first time in years. We went to counseling, individual and couples. We learned to say the things we had been holding back, even the things that hurt. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. Some days I look at her and I feel like I don't even know who she is. Other days I look at her and I remember why I married her in the first place." "That sounds hard." "It is hard." He smiled, but it was a complicated smile. "But I think that's what marriage is. It's not the fairy tale. It's not the happily ever after. It's two people choosing to do the hard work, day after day, even when it's hard. Even when it would be easier to walk away." I nodded. I thought about Marcus, at home, probably starting dinner without me because I was always late. I thought about the life we had built together, the compromises and the arguments and the small daily acts of love that added up to something I couldn't imagine living without. "Thanks, Kevin," I said, "for telling me." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Anytime, Carl. And hey, bring Marcus to Helena sometime. Let's get dinner. Like old times." "I'd like that." He walked away, disappearing into the crowd of farmers and shoppers and people living their ordinary lives. And I stood there, holding my carrots, thinking about all the ways that love could break and all the ways it could heal. Part 9. What I know now. I have been a doctor for 22 years. I have delivered over 2,000 babies, saved more lives than I can count, and lost patients in ways that still wake me up at night. I have seen more human suffering than most people will ever witness, and I have come to believe that suffering is not the exception, it is the rule. We are all broken in one way or another. We are all carrying wounds that never fully heal. What I have learned in all these years is that there is no such thing as a simple story. Every patient who comes into my office has a history that I will never fully know, a childhood, a family, a set of choices and circumstances that led them to this moment, this examination room, this particular kind of pain. I can treat the symptoms, but I cannot undo the causes. I can offer comfort, but I cannot offer answers. And the same is true of the people I love. Marcus, who has stood by me through all the years and all the challenges and all the small daily disappointments that accumulate into a life. My children, who have grown up and moved away and built lives of their own. My parents, who are aging in ways that break my heart a little more each time I visit. They are all mysteries to me, even after all these years. I know the surface of them, their habits, their preferences, their public self, but I will never fully know the interior landscape of their minds and hearts. This used to frustrate me. I wanted to understand everything, to fix everything, to solve the puzzle of human existence once and for all. But now I have made peace with not knowing. I have learned to appreciate the mystery, the way that the people I love contain depths I will never fully explore, worlds I will never fully enter. Justine Monroe was a mystery to me, in the end. I knew her story, or parts of it, the parts she was willing to share, but I never knew the interior truth of her experience. I never knew what it felt like to be her, to have lived her life, to make the choices she made and live with the consequences. But I respected her. I respected her courage in telling the truth, even when the truth was complicated and incomplete and uncomfortable. I respected her willingness to sit with the consequences of her actions, to not hide behind the easy narrative of victimhood. And I respected her wisdom, the wisdom she shared on her blog and in her later years, the understanding that we are all both broken and whole, both perpetrator and victim, both the authors of our own stories and the creatures of circumstances we never chose. Part 10. The Letter. I received a letter from Damon Cole last year. It was handwritten on plain paper with a return address from Prosper Falls. It arrived on a Tuesday in March, mixed in with the bills and the catalog and the other ordinary mail that accumulates in my mailbox. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my desk and went about my day, seeing patients, returning phone call, doing the 1,000 small tasks that make up a life. I didn't open it until that evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, after the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts. The letter was short. 3 pages, written in a handwriting that was shaky but legible. Dear Dr. Whitfield. Asterisk, I don't know if you remember me. It's been a long time. But I wanted to write and tell you something, and you're the only person I could think of who might understand. Asterisk. I'm dying. Asterisk, the doctors say it's my heart. Something about a valve that isn't working right anymore. They say I have maybe a year, maybe less. I'm not supposed to know, but I overheard the nurse talking to my daughter when she visited last month. Asterisk, I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you were there that night. Maybe because you saw all of us at our worst and you didn't judge us. Maybe because I just needed someone to know. Asterisk, I think about that night a lot. More than I should, probably. I think about Justine and Brooke and all the years I wasted not being the person I should have been. I think about the man I was and the man I could have been if I had made different choices. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did. I understand the damage I caused. And I'm sorry, more sorry than I can say. I'm sorry to Justine. I'm sorry to Brock. I'm sorry to my kids who grew up with a father who was never really there. And I'm sorry to myself for all the years I spent wanting something I couldn't have instead of appreciating what I did have. I'm not a religious man, not really. But I have started going to church again, just to sit in the quiet and think. And I have been thinking about grace, about whether it's real, whether it means anything, whether someone like me can be forgiven for the things I've done. I don't know the answer. But I hope so. I hope that at the end, there's some kind of mercy. Some kind of light. Thank you for reading this. I know it probably doesn't make sense. I know I'm probably just a broken old man looking for absolution from someone who has no power to give it. But sometimes that's all we can do, isn't it? Tell our stories. Ask for understanding. Hope that someone, somewhere, will see us as more than the worst thing we ever did. Take care of yourself, Dr. Whitfield. And take care of the people you love. Life is short, and it's precious, and we don't get do-overs. Damon. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in its envelope, and set it on my nightstand. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. I thought about calling him, about visiting him, about offering some kind of comfort or counsel. But in the end, I decided not to. Some stories need to be finished alone. But I wrote back. A short note, just a few lines. Damon. I received your letter. I read it. I understand. I can't give you absolution. No one can, except yourself. But I can tell you this, I see you. Not the worst thing you ever did, but the person underneath, the person who has been carrying that weight for 20 years, who finally found the courage to look at it honestly. That person deserves grace, even if he doesn't believe it. I hope you find peace. Carl. I mailed the letter the next day. I don't know if he received it. I don't know if it made any difference. But I needed him to know that someone had heard him, that his story had been witnessed, even if it could not be forgiven. Epilogue, The Ridge. Last autumn, Marcus and I drove out to Prosper Falls for the Founders' Day celebration. It had been years since we had attended. The traffic and the crowds and the general exhaustion of small-town events had lost their appeal somewhere along the way. But this year, the tourism board had invited us specifically, as longtime residents and supporters of the community. They were unveiling a new historical marker near the old covered bridge, commemorating the town's rich heritage of resilience and community spirit. It was, as these things tend to be, a somewhat tedious affair. Speeches from the mayor and the tourism board director and a state representative who had driven up from Helena for the occasion. A ribbon-cutting ceremony. A plaque unveiled to considerable applause from the assembled crowd of about 50 people, most of whom were related to the organizers. But afterward, when the speeches were done and the plaque was unveiled and the crowd had dispersed to the food stalls and the craft vendors, Marcus suggested we take a drive. "I want to show you something," he said. We drove out to the ridge on the east side of town, the place where, according to the stories, Damon and Justine used to climb as children. The road was unpaved now, rough and rutted, and our sedan complained about every pothole. At the top, we got out and stood at the edge of the world. The view was exactly as the tourism commercials depicted it, the valley spread out below us like a painting, the river glinting in the afternoon sun, the mountains rising up in the distance. But there was something else too, something that commercials couldn't capture, a sense of history, of all the people who had stood in this exact spot and looked at this exact view and felt the same thing I was feeling now. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus said. "Very." "I used to think this view was about escape," he said. "About looking at all this and imagining a different life somewhere else, somewhere beyond the horizon. But lately I've been thinking it's the opposite. I think it's about staying. About looking at this place, imperfect, complicated, full of painful memories, and choosing to be here anyway." I took his hand. "Is this your way of telling me you want to move back to Prosper Falls?" He laughed. "God, no. I just mean, I don't know. I mean that I've been thinking about the choices we make and how they shape our lives. About how easy it is to spend years regretting what we didn't do instead of appreciating what we did." I nodded. I thought about Damon, alone in his small house on the edge of town, dying of a failing heart. I thought about Justine, in Helena, writing her blog and finding her way to something like peace. I thought about Kevin, at the farmer's market, talking about the hard work of marriage and the importance of staying. "I think love is complicated," I said finally. "I think it's messier and harder and more painful than anyone ever tells you. But I also think it's worth it. I think the trying is worth it, even when it fails." Marcus squeezed my hand. "I agree." We stood there for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. And I thought about all the stories I had witnessed in my years as a doctor, the birth and the death, the healings and the losses, the countless ways that people found meaning in the midst of suffering. I thought about Damon and Justine and the strange, terrible, human thing that had happened between them. I thought about the 20 years they had spent circling each other, wanting something they couldn't have, until finally the wanting broke them both. And I thought about what Justine had written on her blog all those years ago, that we are all both broken and whole, both victims and perpetrators, both the authors of our own stories and the creatures of circumstances we never chose. Maybe that was the truth. Maybe that was all any of us could offer, not answers, not solutions, but simply the acknowledgement that we were all doing our best with what we had. That we were all climbing towards something, even if we didn't know what it was. The sun set behind the mountains. The air grew cold. Marcus and I got back in the car and drove home to Prosper Falls, to the life we had built there, to the people we had become. And somewhere in the distance, the river kept running, the same river it had always been, carrying the same water it had always carried, moving toward a sea it would never reach. Asterisk. The end. Part 11, Brooke's story. I received a letter from Brooke Cole 6 months after Damon's. Her handwriting was different from his, neat and precise, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years writing lesson plans and parent emails. The return address was in Missoula, a small rented house near the university where she had gone back to school to get her master's degree in social work. Dear Dr. Whitfield, Asterisk, I'm not sure why I'm writing to you. I suppose it's because you were there, at the beginning of this whole mess, and because you saw all of us at our worst. You saw what Damon did, and what Justine did, and what Kevin did, and what I did in the aftermath, asterisk. Asterisk, I need to tell my side of the story. Not because I think I'm innocent, I'm not. I made mistakes too. But because I think there's something important that people need to understand about what happens to wives when their husbands have affairs, asterisk. Asterisk, we don't just feel betrayed. We feel invisible, asterisk. Asterisk, for 15 years, I was Brooke Cole, Damon's wife, the mother of his children, the woman who ran his household and managed his calendar and reminded him to call his mother on Sundays. I was a role, not a person. A function, not a self, asterisk. Asterisk, and then the affair happened, and suddenly I was visible again. Everyone was looking at me, the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, the careful questions designed to find out if I knew or suspected or was completely blindsided. Asterisk. Asterisk, I hated it. I hated being seen like that, being reduced to a victim, being put in a category that didn't fit who I was or what I had done, asterisk. Asterisk, because here's the thing, I wasn't innocent in any of this. I knew, on some level, that something was wrong with my marriage. I knew that Damon was distant, that he was going through the motions, that there was a part of him I could never reach. I told myself it was just the stress of his work, the pressure of raising 2 boys, the natural drift that happens in every long marriage, asterisk. Asterisk, but I knew. And I didn't do anything about it, asterisk. Asterisk, that's not an excuse. It's not a justification. It's just the truth. I was afraid to look too closely at my marriage because I was afraid of what I might find. And by the time I finally forced myself to look, it was too late. The damage was done, asterisk. Asterisk, I'm not saying I'm as guilty as Damon. What he did was a choice, a terrible, destructive choice that hurt me and Justine and his children and himself. But I contributed to the conditions that made that choice possible. I let my marriage become a shell. I let myself become invisible, asterisk. Asterisk, that's something I'm working on now. In my program, in my therapy, in my new life in Missoula. I'm learning to be visible again. To take up space. To want things for myself instead of just going along with what everyone else wants, asterisk. Asterisk, it's hard. It's so hard. But it's also the most important work I've ever done, asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know if Damon will read this letter before he dies. I don't know if he'll understand what I'm trying to say. But I wanted you to know that I don't hate him anymore. I don't hate Justine either. I just feel sad. Sad for all the wasted years. Sad for the family we could have been if we had all made different choices, asterisk. Asterisk, but also grateful, in a strange way. Because all of this, the pain, the humiliation, the breakdown, it forced me to become someone new. Someone I actually want to be, asterisk. Asterisk, take care of yourself, Dr. Whitfield. And thank you for listening, asterisk. Brooke. I read the letter twice, the same way I had read Damon's. And then I added it to the small stack of papers I kept in my desk drawer, the letters from people who had passed through my life in ways I never expected, who had trusted me with their stories when they had nowhere else to turn. I never wrote back to Brooke. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound hollow or presumptuous. But I kept her letter, and I thought about it often, about the strange ways that pain could become a doorway, if we were brave enough to walk through it. Part 12, The Class Reunion. The 20th reunion of the Prosper Falk High School class of 1998 was held in the summer of 2018 in the community center that had been built in the early 2000s to replace the old gymnasium where Damon and Justine had attended their proms. Marcus and I went, mostly out of curiosity. We had lived in Prosper Falls for over a decade by then, but we had never been to a high school reunion. The social dynamics of small-town alumni events had always seemed too complicated to navigate. The gym was decorated with streamers and balloons in the school colors, green and gold, the colors of the Prosper Falls Fighting Badgers, whatever a badger was supposed to be in a town that was 300 miles from the nearest badger habitat. A DJ was playing music from the late 90s, songs I had danced to when I was in college, before I had ever heard of Prosper Falls or medicine or the thousand complications of adult life. Most of the faces I didn't recognize. These were people who had grown up here, who had memories of this place that I could never share. They clustered in groups, laughing and catching up, trading updates on children and careers and the various fortunes that had befallen their classmates over the years. But I did recognize a few people. I recognized the mayor, who had been a year ahead of me in medical school. I recognized the woman who ran a grocery store, who had delivered 3 of my patients to my practice over the years. I recognized, from a distance, the man who had been the high school football coach, older now, grayer, but still carrying himself with the ramrod posture of someone who had spent decades yelling instructions at teenagers. And I recognized, sitting alone at a table near the back of the room, the woman who had once been Brooke Cole. She looked different from the photographs I had seen of her at the hospital, those years ago. She was thinner, for one thing, and her hair, which had been a nondescript brown in those photos, was now streaked with silver. She was wearing a simple black dress, and she was nursing a glass of wine with a kind of deliberate focus that suggested she was not entirely comfortable with the social demands of the evening. I didn't approach her. I didn't know what I would say. But later, when Marcus and I were leaving, I saw her standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot. She was alone, and she seemed far away, lost in thoughts I could only imagine. IED for a moment. Then I walked over. "Brooke?" She turned. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. I had changed too, in the years since the incident, and then her face cleared. "Dr. Whitfield." "Carl." She managed to smile. "It's been a long time." "It has." I stood beside her, looking out at the parking lot. "Are you here for the reunion?" "Something like that." She took a sip of her wine. "I grew up here, you know. Before I married Damon. Before I became Damon Cole's wife. I had forgotten how it felt, being back. How small the world seems when you grew up in it. Do you regret it? Coming back?" She considered the question. "I don't know if regret is the right word. I think about the person I was when I left, how young and naive and desperate I was to escape. And I think about the person I am now, older, sadder, but also somehow freer. I think I needed to come back to understand how far I've traveled. That's a generous interpretation. I'm a generous person. Or I'm trying to be." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "Therapy helps. Therapy helps a lot of people. It helps the people who are willing to look at themselves honestly." She turned to face me. "I want to tell you something, Dr. Whitfield. Something I haven't told anyone. Okay. I don't know if I ever really loved Damon. I thought I did. I thought that's what this feeling was, this pull toward him, this desire to be near him. But now, looking back, I think it might have been something else. I think I wanted to be saved. I wanted someone to see me, to choose me, to make me feel like I mattered. And did he? See you? For a while. When we were first married, he saw me. He noticed me. He made me feel like the most important person in the world." She paused. "But then we had children, and he got busy with the store, and I got busy with the house, and we stopped seeing each other. We became roommates who shared a bed. We became two people maintaining the appearance of a life together. That sounds lonely. It was. She looked out the window again. And then he met Justine at that reunion, and I saw him come alive in a way he hadn't in years. And I knew, even though he never said anything, that part of him had never stopped loving her. That part of him had been waiting for her this whole time. Brooke, I'm not saying it was okay. What he did was wrong. What she did was wrong. What I did, staying, pretending, hoping it would all somehow work itself out, was wrong too. She took a breath. But I'm saying that I understand now. I understand that love isn't always enough. That sometimes two people can try their best and still fail. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go. We stood in silence for a moment. The music from the gym was muffled through the walls, something by Backstreet Boy, a song about wanting it that way. Are you happy now? I asked. In Mazumla? I'm learning to be. She smiled. Happiness isn't a destination, I think. It's a practice. Something you have to work at every day, even when you don't feel like it. That's wise. I have my moments. She finished her wine. Thank you for talking to me, Dr. Whitfield. I know this must be strange for you, all these people from your past, all these stories you never asked to be part of. I don't mind. I've learned a lot from your stories. We all have stories. The trick is finding someone who will listen to them without judging. She excused herself then, and I watched her walk back into the gym, rejoining the crowd of people who had known her before she became a wife and mother and all the other roles she had played. She was still finding her way, I realized. Still learning who she was when she wasn't being anyone else's story. I found Marcus by the dessert table, sampling a brownie with the appreciative expression of a man who had long ago stopped worrying about his waistline. Ready to go? I asked. Almost. These brownies are excellent. I think they're from May's old recipe. May's has been closed for years. Her granddaughter runs the catering company now. She uses May's recipes. Of course. In Prosper Falls, nothing ever really disappeared. It just transformed into something new. We left the reunion a few minutes later. As we drove home, I thought about Brock's words, about love not being enough, about the kindest thing being to let go. I thought about Damon, alone in his house, dying of a failing heart. I thought about Justine, writing her blog, finding her way to something like peace. And I thought about Marca, beside me, humming along to the radio with the easy contentment of a man who had found what he was looking for. Maybe that was the secret, I thought. Maybe love wasn't about finding the right person or making the right choices or avoiding all the mistakes that led to pain. Maybe it was about showing up, day after day, and doing the work of building something that could survive the weight of everything life threw at it. Maybe it was about being willing to be seen, all of you, the good parts and the bad parts, and trusting someone to stay anyway. Part 13, The Hospice. Damon Cole died on a Thursday in November, in the small house on the edge of Prosper Falls where he had lived alone for the past 13 years. I was not there when he passed. I was at home, in my living room, watching the news with Marcus when my phone buzzed with a message from a friend at the hospital. An obituary, essentially, the end of a story I had been following, in one way or another, for over 2 decades. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, which was technically accurate. But I knew, as I suspect many people in town knew, that his heart had been failing for longer than the organ itself. It had been failing since the night at the hotel, since the confrontation in the conference room, since the confession that had shattered everything he thought he knew about himself. His children were with him at the end, Tyler had driven up from Missoula, where he was finishing his graduate degree in environmental science. Connor had flown in from Seattle, where he worked for a tech company that designed software for renewable energy infrastructure. They had been there for 2 weeks, taking turns sitting with their father, holding his hand as he faded. Brooke had come too, for the last few days. It was the first time in over a decade that she had been back in Prosper Falls for more than a passing visit. I didn't know what was said between them, no one did, but I imagined it was something like what she had written in her letter. Something about forgiveness, or at least the beginning of forgiveness. Something about letting go. The funeral was held at the Methodist Church on Main Street, the famed church where Damon and Brooke had been married 25 years earlier. The pews were full, more people than I had expected, given how isolated Damon had become in his final years. But Prosper Falls was a small town, and small towns had long memories. People came not because they approved of what Damon had done, but because they had known him since he was a boy. They had watched him grow up, watched him make his mistakes, watched him suffer the consequences. They came out of respect, or curiosity, or the simple human need to be present for the ending of the story. Justine was not there. I didn't expect her to be. She had her own life now, her own healing to attend to. Some doors were better left closed. After the service, there was a reception at the community center, the same place where the reunion had been held 5 years earlier. I went, mostly out of a sense of obligation, and found myself standing near the back of the room, sipping coffee from a paper cup and watching the collection of mourners who had come to pay their respects. Damon's children were at the front of the room, receiving condolences from a stream of visitors. They looked exhausted, the particular exhaustion of people who had been through something difficult and were only now beginning to understand its weight. But they also looked, in some strange way, at peace. As if the ending had brought them a closure they hadn't known they needed. Marcus found me near the dessert table. "It's strange," he said, "being at the funeral of someone you knew but didn't really know." "Strange," I agreed. "But also, I don't know. Important, maybe. A reminder that everyone's story is bigger than the part we see. You've been thinking about this a lot, haven't you? The whole Damon and Justine situation." "I have." I set down my coffee cup. "I think about all the stories I've witnessed over the years, all the births and death and everything in between. And I think about how rarely we get to see the whole picture. We see fragments, pieces, moments that don't make sense on their own but somehow add up to a life. And Damon's life? What does it add up to?" I thought about the question. I thought about the boy who had stuffed Justine's locker with flowers he had picked from Mrs. Thompson's garden. The teenager who had found religion in the parking lot behind the school, only to lose his faith again in the years that followed. The husband who had spent 15 years in a marriage that was slowly starving to death. The man who had done something terrible in a hotel room and spent the rest of his life trying to understand why. "I think it adds up to a warning," I said finally. "A warning about what happens when you spend your whole life wanting something you can't have. When you let the fantasy consume the real. Is that a lesson? I think it's a possibility. A pitfall. Something to be aware of." I picked up my coffee cup again. We all have our Justines and Damons, don't we? The things we want so badly that we're willing to destroy everything else to get them. The question is whether we can recognize those hungers before they destroy us. Marcus nodded slowly. "And what about the people who can't? The ones who go too far, like Damon?" Then we try to understand. We try to offer grace even when it's not deserved. And we try to learn from their mistakes so we don't have to make them ourselves. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the mourners mill about. And then, from somewhere near the front of the room, I heard the sound of a child laughing, one of Damon's grandchildren, running between the legs of the adults with the uncomplicated joy of someone who didn't yet know how complicated life could get. It was a strange sound to hear at a funeral, but it felt right, somehow. A reminder that life continued, that stories ended but also began, that the people we lost were never entirely gone as long as someone remembered them. I thought about all the stories I had collected over the year, from patients, from friends, from strangers who had trusted me with their secrets. I thought about all the lessons I had learned, and all the ones I was still trying to understand. And I thought about the people in this room, broken, complicated, human, and the strange grace that could be found in simply being present for each other's stories. Even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones.